Uh, Hi there, this is Afro Perspectives. Wicknell Chivayo, the controversial Zimbabwean businessman, has been awarded a contract by the Namibian Electoral Commission, the ECN, to print ballot papers for the upcoming Namibian election. The contract is worth 60 million US dollars, and his company, Renform CC, the company that is based in Johannesburg, South Africa, has been chosen ahead of all other companies that tendered for the contract. In fact, the Electoral Commission of Namibia actually cancelled the tender without any clear justification and used the emergency procurement route and handpicked Renform CC. The reasons why they have done that is not actually clear why we ended up with Chivayo being awarded the contract. But I'll just want to give you a background to how to a likely explanation of how we ended up with Chivayo being awarded the tender. On the 27th of September 2024, Utoni Nuyoma, a top official from the Namibia's ruling party SWAPO, paid a visit to Emmerson Mnangagwa at State House. The meeting, details of the meeting are not clear what actually was discussed, but after that, it is alleged that SWAPO, one of the top officials of SWAPO, let me see if I can get you that later on here. Yes, immediately after Utoni Nuyoma's visit to the Zimbabwean State House, where he met the Zimbabwean President Emmerson Mnangagwa, SWAPO Secretary General Sophia Shangingwa wrote a letter to the Namibian Electoral Commission, and it's addressed to Advocate Heidi Jacobs, and it promised 2 million Namibian dollars if SWAPO were to emerge victorious after the election. The National Electoral Commission of Namibia has described the letter as a forgery, and I'm not sure how this stands with the contents of the letter. The contents of the letter, it appears there are some typing errors, typos, spelling mistakes, that sort of things, but it actually promised that the SWAPO would give 2 million Namibian dollars to Advocate Heidi Jacobs if she were to sway the election in favor of SWAPO in the upcoming election. So that's the letter. The letter is dated the October 7th, and that's the date the NEC cancelled the tender for the printing of ballot papers, and it went on to use the emergency procurement route, and it handpicked Renform CC to print the ballot papers. So this is what transpired, and then on the 18th of October, that's when that's this past Friday, that's when it came out that the National Electoral Commission of Namibia had handpicked Renform CC to print ballot papers for the upcoming election. And the issue now is the Renform CC is embroiled in controversial practices with the Zimbabwean election, and we all know what happened with the Zimbabwean election. There were massive fraudulent practices, and there were allegations of vote rigging, and ZANU-PF went on to claim that to win that election under very unclear circumstances and dubious circumstances. The opposition in Zimbabwe, the Triple C party, which was led by Nelson Chamisa, challenged the outcome of that election. So what the Namibians are actually afraid that the the upcoming elections are not going to be free and fair given the controversial circumstances. The tender for the printing of ballot papers have been actually awarded to Renform CC. The Namibian Electoral Commission cancelled on October 7. That was just 2 days before the submission deadline for the tender process, and they cancelled that whole process without justification, and no one has actually been able to explain why they have done that. But like I said, there is a letter on circulating on social media alleging that SWAPO paid $2 million to a top official of the Namibian Electoral Commission, Heidi Jacobs, and the SWAPO is trying to actually sway the election in its favor. All across Southern Africa, ruling parties, the former liberation movements, their fortunes have been on the decline, and in Zimbabwe itself, the ruling ZANU-PF party has not won any elections. All the elections that it has contested in since the year 2000, 24 years ago, it has not even won a single of those, and it has been using corrupt practices such as rigging and manipulation of voters to maintain its grip on power. So what the People's Democratic Movement in Namibia, the main opposition party, has been actually contesting those practices, and it has formally protested those, and it has written letter to the police and the courts contesting those, the choice of Renform CC as the party to print the ballot papers. And then the SWAPO is, although it won about 65% of the vote in the last election, and that was in November of 2019. But there are fears that its fortunes, its chances of winning this election have narrowed down, and it fears that it's likely to it faces a strong challenge from the People's Democratic Movement, the main opposition party. So those are the issues. And then it's not only been that the ZANU-PF has been exporting. You had heard from Henry Venani, that's the top election president or the leader of the People's Democratic Movement, alleging that ZANU-PF is actually exporting its undemocratic practices like vote rigging, manipulation of voters throughout the Southern African region. I'll let you hear yourself from Henry Venani himself. There he is.
We are going to have a march on Tuesday to protect our democracy, to reject with the contempt it deserves what the Electoral Commission of Namibia and its shenanigans wants to do by inviting a company that is broiled in international corruption both in Zimbabwe and South Africa, importing their corrupt activities that they practiced during the failed Zimbabwean elections into Namibia. We are calling upon the...
Yes, so that's Henry Venani on there. And what actually is worrying for most opposition parties in the Southern African region is that there is a process called benchmarking, and benchmarking normally is used in commerce and industry, where, say, a company that's regarded as employing best practices, say, in any field, it's used as a measure of how to do things, or it is taken as the leader in that field, and then other companies, other organizations, they copy practices from that company. So now what we have here is the reverse of that. In the Southern African region, liberation movements in places like Botswana, Mozambique, and just as we have seen right now in Namibia, they are using the West sort of practices, and ZANU-PF is actually most the opposition parties in in all of Southern Africa. They are convinced that ZANU-PF is exporting its undemocratic practices, is exporting them to other neighboring countries. And it's not only in Namibia where this has come, where this has surfaced. In Botswana is holding its election as well in the next month, and Ian Khama has actually alleged that ZANU-PF has sent security operatives, agents from the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission. They have actually exchanged notes with the Electoral Commission in Botswana. And this is worrying for most groups, because it appears that there is a tendency where democracy is actually on the is threatened. There is backsliding towards autocratic practices where the ruling parties are actually denying space for the opposition to win elections, because they are copying what is happening in Zimbabwe, and they are actually importing those practices into their own country. In the recent Mozambican election that's just been conducted over this past week, there have been allegations that ZANU-PF is actually Mozambique has opened polling stations in Zimbabwe for its residents who are resident in Zimbabwe. There is one polling station that has attracted the attention of the press and other people who are advocating for a fair election in Mozambique. It's one polling station in a place called Nemamwa in Zimbabwe, and there are allegations that people who were actually voting in that station, they were not Mozambican at all, but they were ZANU-PF activists who were voting to sway the election. And there is even news that has come up that in places like Ngulumane in Bulawayo, there are polling stations there for people voting in the Mozambican elections. And what local residents of Ngulumane suburb in Bulawayo and Bulawayo itself, what they have been observing is that there are hardly any Mozambican residents who are resident in Bulawayo, and this is there are no official statistics, obviously. But then people are questioning, why would you open a polling station to vote in the Mozambican election where there is hardly any Mozambicans at all? If it was in the capital Harare, we could actually understand that, but there are no Mozambican residents in a place like Nkulumane in Bulawayo. And then there is also in the recent Mozambican election, there is past elections in Mozambique, they have been peaceful. But at this point in time, the opposition, the independent candidate in the Mozambican election, Venancio Mondlane has actually claimed that he has won this election. And it now appears that Frelimo is now using the tactics we have seen used in Zimbabwe, employed in Zimbabwe: voter intimidation, threats against the opposition, and in some instances killing members of the opposition, killing people who are actually monitoring the election. There has been press reports that a lawyer, an opposition lawyer, has been killed in the coming election. Let me see if I can get you his name. Yes, his name is a lawyer for Podemos. That is the opposition party that is behind Venancio Mondlane. And Elvinho Dias, that's the lawyer's name. And then party representative Paulo Guambe. They were killed this past few days, and they were. That's the sort of tactics that are being employed by Frelimo, the ruling party. So we have seen a trend where the ruling parties in in Southern Africa, in places like Zimbabwe, Namibia, Botswana, and recently South Africa, they're all losing power. Power is slipping away from their hands, and they are not going quietly. They are employing the tried and tested methods employed by ZANU-PF to stay in power without actually the people's consent, without people actually voting for them. And this is worrying. This is worrying. And you have got shady characters like Wicknell Chivayo. And Wicknell Chivayo is very close to the Zimbabwean president, is very close to the ruling elite in Zimbabwe. And imagine one of the issues that came up in the recently concluded Zimbabwean elections in 2023 was the actually inflating prices for ordinary things. And in one instance, let me see if I can get you this on the screen. So, for example, in the recently concluded Zimbabwean election, Renform, the Chivayo's company, invoiced the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission. It was a printer or a server. That's what they are saying in the press, and the server normally cost 23 million rands. The server normally cost 90,000 rands, just 90,000 rands. And they invoiced the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission to pay 23 million US dollars. And these are the sort of practices that Chivayo is doing. It's actually milking the state, the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, swindling money out of through practices like overpricing, and then the printing of ballots themselves. They once they have done that, the outcome of the election favors whoever is given the contracts to Chivayo. And in the case of the recently concluded Zimbabwean election, it was the ruling party, and the People's Democratic Movement in Namibia now fears the same thing, and it fears that once Chivayo has taken over the printing of ballots and the running of elections in Namibia, SWAPO is going to get whatever, to come up with whatever numbers they want and claim that they have won the election. So these are the issues at stake. Thank you for listening in, if you have not yet subscribed, please do so.